Hey, everybody, it's Roger King. Thanks so much for joining me right here on my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to talk about the 5 brutal things that I learned during the sale of my first mobile home park that just happened very recently, and I'm excited to get into it. Before we start, please hit subscribe. I'm going to be updating this YouTube channel very frequently, 4 or 5 times a week from now on. And I want to invite everybody to join into the discussion that we're going to have about all the various types of real estate investing, the pros and cons, the good times, the bad times, the things we're learning, the things we need to ponder, the things that we need to understand, and how do we become better and better and better real estate investors. So let's jump into these 5 lessons that I learned, brutal lessons. Some aren't really brutal, but it's great to say it. So we sold, just an overview here. Some partners and I bought our first mobile home park about 5 years ago outside of Oklahoma City. Decent park. We had a lot of excitement about getting into that new sector. We'd all been real estate investors for a long time, and we thought, okay, we're going to be able to kind of get in and get out, and borrow our money from our investors. Get some, we had an owner financing situation here, which was great. And it was great for a while. We had some problems and some internal conflicts on how things should have been done. Whatever, you got to, watch how things are structured, what the rights and responsibilities of each partner are. We can jump into some of those things later. But really, at the end of the whole thing, we had decided to sell. We got an offer very quickly because we had some relationships. We got into escrow January 6th, I think it was. We opened escrow. And it was, I think, a 75-day close with maybe a 15-day extension built into the purchase and sale agreement. Fairly standard. We weren't necessarily hopeful. And it turned out a couple of things prior to these lessons. One of the things that we realized that we were in a refinancing process with a particular bank on, I think it was 5 other mobile home parks at the same time as we were selling this one. And it turns out our buyer was using the same bank that we were doing these refinances with. Fantastic, to a degree. What we realized was that they're very slow on their approval process and their entire operations of loan approval, submitting to the lending committee, and then just turning around all of the documents. You couple that with all of the various other things that the seller and buyer need to provide to escrow to get it done, and it just took a lot longer. So one of the very first things that we learned very late in the game, and I think that this is an important thing to know right away in the early stages of that escrow, is the funds to close that the buyer needs to have. And what we were unaware of, because we'd already sold a park to this buyer, and we'd already worked with the lender, so we made an assumption. And I think that assumptions have really been tough on me particularly. I see that assumptions on everybody else really are difficult because, man, assumptions can cause drama, and drama costs money. I would say that the verifying of the funds to close would be super critical. And here's where we didn't learn until probably the last month of escrow, before we actually were set to close in, I think it was mid-May. The buyer didn't have enough cash. And that's a drag, because we should have verified that he had those funds way back. What we learned was that he was waiting on the refinance of another property to pull cash out, do a cash out refi on that, to be able to put that into this new purchase. And that refinance took longer than he thought, which made our closing take longer, but he also received less cash out. So the week before closing, or maybe 2 weeks before closing, no, the week of closing. Now we're extended 5 months of closing. We're 2 months behind the original close of escrow agreed to in the contract from January 6th. He says, I'm not going to be able to close. I'm backing out. And it was a shock, as you could imagine. We were sort of flabbergasted, and we'd had, loan approval. The docs were written. We were literally ready to close, and he just couldn't come up with the cash. And the problem with that is, we were telling our investors, we're going to pay you off. We're looking at some new projects because we're going to do 1031 exchange. It just creates a hassle, and what do you do? And so one of the things that I realized, brutal lesson number 2, was that my partner on this and I had never sold a property together before. This was our first property that we got into, and we never sold one together. And he thought that, and I didn't check him on this, and this is, certainly my responsibility to participate in this part of it. He only asked for a $25,000 earnest money deposit, which was right around 1%. And I thought, okay, if this guy, my personal belief is, and maybe you agree with me and maybe you disagree with me, and that's totally okay. My belief is that if they have more on the line, they're going to let us know earlier that they can't close. And we could have always restructured it somehow that he could put in more money, after a certain time. Once the inspection period is up, he should have been able to put in another $25,000 so that money goes hard 3 months ago, 3 months before we actually ended up closing. And I think that there are some ways to structure that. And I think that, what we're trying to do is to get people to commit to something, a buyer, if we're selling, get a buyer to commit to it. If we don't want to put the full 3% earnest money deposit, make them required to pay that right up front, get them to put 1% in, and then a gradual another 1% at the time of the diligence period expires. So they're either in or they're out in that 30 or 45 days, whatever you've given them. And then once the bank financing is approved, they have to put the final 1% in. I think that graduated structure is fair. I think it's reasonable. And all we're trying to do is make sure that they're committed to buying their property, their new property. But we didn't do that. Definitely on me, because I wasn't aware that was the the way that this was being done. That's okay. We have our separate roles in these various businesses, and we'd never done this before. So I thought we were already aligned. My assumption was we were already aligned. And he said, well, his belief was it doesn't really matter. I have a different belief, and I could have, as the partner on this, said, no, I think that this is matter. This is where I really want to be, involved, and I want to make sure that this is how we do those things. So when we got to that point where it was no longer a closing date because he's backing out, he was only going to walk away from his $25,000 earnest money deposit and the $20,000 or $25,000 that he put in for some of the other things that he needed to buy, surveys and phase 1 inspection, which is is there any contamination in the ground? Is there oil or petrochemicals or any other types of chemicals that are infiltrating the topsoil that may cause problems? So you have to get a phase 1 so that the bank says, look, we don't have any liability with the land down the road. Um, One of the other things that we realized early on, brutal lesson, not so brutal, but that the survey is going to take an extraordinarily long time. Extraordinary long time, and it's going to cost a lot of money. And so we had to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. And, you know, some of these people, God bless them, man, they had so many different things that they had to go and review, back to the county office and back to, looking at all the books and actual books and records. Some of them were on microfiche, some of them weren't. Various deeds and going through all the deeds and all the, easements. And it just takes forever. So that was one of the delays from that 75-day closing period to why it extended out another 2 months before the original buyer backed out. So it just takes forever. So plan for those types of extensions. If you don't get a survey when you're buying, which I would recommend, then make sure that you're planning for a significant amount of time for when it sells. The next thing, I think that this would be probably the third thing, is if you're owning mobile homes in a mobile home park, there are titles, individual titles that are not real property, but personal property. And in order for a bank to finance, if you have 10 or 15 or 50 mobile homes that you're collecting rent on, you need to prove that you own them. And there's several different ways you can do that. You can get a title. Maybe the person you're buying it from has the title, and they transfer that title to you as the new park owner, and then you transfer it to the buyer that's coming in, seller to buyer, you transfer that title. If you don't, maybe the bank will allow for a bill of sale on a particular mobile home, because maybe the title process to generate a new title is so onerous and long, it takes so long, and you can't find a title, which happens frequently in this business. They allow for another sale, a bill of sale, to register what is being transferred from your ownership to the new buyer's ownership. So a lender is going to want all those titles. So when we are now buying our mobile home parks, and we're buying a bunch, we're making sure that we have all the titles, or at least they've started the title purchasing process before we close on that, so that if it takes us 75 to 90 days to buy our new mobile home park, then we are further down the line of having that title, so that our lender says, yeah, that's great. We see that it's either in process, you're going to get a bill of sale for those 3 or 5 that you don't have, and then you're going to go ahead and be able to close that loan, but you're still already in the process of getting the title generated for you, because at some point we're going to need to refinance that, and they're going to want to make sure that we have titles. So I would urge that process to happen earlier, sooner rather than later. So I talked about the original buyer not being able to close because he didn't have enough cash. Well, the broker guy who had brought this buyer, the buyer one, we'll call him buyer one, the broker who brought buyer one to the table was going to lose on his commission. So he decided, hey, I'm going to find a backup buyer. And he did. And they came into it and they said, hey, we like it. We want to do it. We need, a little bit of time to do due diligence. And we negotiated back and forth on an extension, because as opposed to a new loan or a new purchase and sale agreement, because he was going to join in with the buyer one. So buyer two, which was 2 people, their partnership partnered with the original buyer, who was already pre-approved on the loan. All those loan docs were drawn up. They've gone through loan approval committee. They got that. And so they just partnered with that guy, which was fantastic. It took a little bit of time. And so the brutal lesson on this is the day before closing. So we had a 2 or 3 week extension period. The day before closing, they decided that they wanted to come back and negotiate the day before closing. And they wanted a $50,000 seller credit on this purchase price. And we were selling this particular park for $2.45 million. So they wanted to buy this park for 2.4 because they got the survey done and they noticed that there was a shorter lot line. And my partner and I talked quite a bit about it and talked to a couple of other people. And we were both fairly livid because they had broached that topic with me a couple of weeks before. And they said nothing about it at the time. They just said, hey, we see that the lot line's a little shorter than what we were thinking. And at that moment, they could have said, hey, we're probably going to want a discount, which would have been the very cool thing. And my partner and I thought, that's a fair and reasonable request. But what we found is, and I have a misperception about this particular kind of snobby Southern California, Northern California real estate investor who's kind of a dick about things, who, they're only about what can they get. They don't have any foresight on how are things going to go for them down the road. And they're just egotistical. I didn't get a good taste in my mouth. I'm certainly not naming them, but I just didn't enjoy the back and forth with them. I'm happy to negotiate, but to come to me the day before closing and say, I want a $50,000 discount, I was using expletives, to say the very least. And I don't like to operate that way. I want to be as straight up as possible. If there's a problem, I want to address it right away. And maybe it's still my naivete, after 27 years in business and life, that people are going to act as the way I want to act. So I didn't do well with that sort of last minute negotiation. And, my partner and I were like, listen, man, screw you guys. Buy it or don't buy it. We don't care. And, then we started to do the calculation in our brain of, okay, so if we take it, if they decide not to close on a $50,000 thing, request of seller credit, okay, what does that really cost us? Well, it costs us at least 90 more days with a new buyer through the lending process. It takes at least another 30 days to find a new buyer. And so we're talking about 4 more months. And really, we just, we want to focus on the rest of our portfolio. This one is so far away from everything. So we realized that, okay, it may be better. So at the same time, we sort of came to that conclusion. The broker said, hey, why don't you guys split it 50-50? And we did a little good cop, bad cop. Brandon was on the phone with the broker and he said, man, I don't know if Roger won't go for it. Roger won't go for it. I'm the bad cop, which I kind of enjoy sometimes. Maybe you do too. I also like being the good cop. But Brandon said, man, Roger's not going to go for it. And this guy, the broker, was like, well, would he do 10? And at that moment, we realized, look, they're just trying to get anything. These are the kind of guys that just want to ask for something and get any kind of discount that they can. And my business partner and I talked about it. We thought, okay, that's how you want to roll. Sure. I mean, you could have asked for a discount. We probably would have given you the full $50,000 discount if you would have brought this up, 2 weeks ago when you originally brought up the concern. But you chose to operate in a really dickish way this whole time. So you know what? We have no compassion, but we'll take that $10,000 discount. We'll do that seller credit. We'll be done with the property. And there's a few other things that have to happen over the course of the next few years that may or may not impact that loss of $10,000. We may be able to offset that because there are some mobile homes that are still in our name that we've personally guaranteed that, okay, so if we have to pay $8,000 to this lender because somebody gets foreclosed on, we own that mobile home. So now there's a mobile home that we own in the park that we have to pay $8,000 for because that was the loan amount 4 years ago. And we can sell that to them for maybe $18,000. So we get to recoup our $10,000. I think there's like 6 or 8 of those homes that we've personally guaranteed that won't go to them automatically if and when they get foreclosed on. They come back to us. So we don't have a good taste in our mouth with those guys. And that's not our fault. That's the way they chose to act. I've been waiting for a little while to have this conversation. So just understand that your choices and how you tend to operate as negotiators, this is all about me, whatever, man. We're trying to do business. You're either going to come at me in good faith or you're going to come at me in bad faith. If you come at me in bad faith, that's on you. And I'm going to operate then with this perception that that's the way you're going to do everything. So I don't really care about you and your business and your feelings. I'm not going to do anything necessarily to screw you over. I'm not going to take care of you, though. Maybe you think that that's an okay way to act, to come back at somebody the day before closing and say, hey, we're thinking about walking unless we can get a $50,000 discount. Okay, sure. I mean, but did you really think that through? Is that really how you want to operate in this world? I've met so many people, and I'm not just singling out Southern California, but, having lived there for the better part of 20 years and doing a lot of business with a lot of just asshats, people down there, just there's this ego thing and they just, it's all about them. They're not here for the greater good. There's so many ways to make money in real estate. And they choose to just be in this really super narrow-minded, stupid, in my opinion, operation. I don't know, maybe that's because they were not loved when they were 3. I've got that problem, but I've gone the other way. I'm not saying that my parents didn't love me. What I'm saying is that you get to choose how you're going to operate. You're going to choose to work in good faith or you're going to choose to work in bad faith. That's on you. So the negotiation, we took the $10,000 seller discount at the day before closing. It still took a few more days for a number of reasons. Titles was one thing. There were just a few different concerns. We got done. We got closed. It's no longer our park. They're dealing with it. It's on them. So they get to run that business however they choose to run it. But I wanted to share some of the intricacies that we go through when we're buying and selling property and what are some of the lessons. So just to make sure, we're going to go here, not necessarily in order, we're going to verify the funds to close upon acceptance of the purchase and sale agreement. We're going to make sure that we have all the titles as soon as we can for all of the mobile home parks. We're going to make sure that the survey is done or at least ordered as soon as possible because a bank is going to need that just as soon as you can. That's either when you're buying or selling. So is the earnest money deposit enough? 1% maybe when you execute the contract, 1% when you are finished with the due diligence period, the inspection period, and a final 3% when you've got final loan approval. So at that point, that 3% is now hard. So, and then what about negotiation in good faith or bad faith at the end or at any point in between? Those are some really great things. Please, once again, subscribe below, and I will keep putting these videos out there. What's happening for us? What's happening for you? Some thoughts, some questions. If you do have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Go ahead and ask some questions below. Thanks again. Subscribe, and I'll see you probably tomorrow. Thank you.